This is a two-part series showing modeling and authoring techniques for a report that displays the latest period a logged-in user is allowed to see. Before we take a look at the model and the report authoring techniques, let's take a look at the final output and what the expected results are. Currently we're logged in as Frank Breton, and Frank Breton is a reviewer of the data. So he's allowed to see more periods than regular users are allowed to see because he has to validate the data before it is released to the general population. He has two options. He can look at the actual data in this case, as well as planned periods. So for 2014 Q1, there's actual data as well as planned data. If we switch it for Frank Breton to planned, we'll see that for 2014 Q2, which is the latest planning period that is in the data, there is no actual data in the database yet, but there is planning data. He also has the option to choose any period he would like to see, so he can go back in time to Q1, which is what we saw earlier, which has actual data, or any of the other quarters. Now if we're logged in as a general user, in this case Jeff Waters, we can see that the latest period is defaulted to 2013 Q4. If we switch to planned data, again it stays in 2013 Q4 because this is the latest period that this particular user has access to see, since he is not a previewer. So let's take a look at the Framework Manager model used to support the reporting technique that we saw earlier. This particular model has two layers, a data source layer and a business layer. The data source layer consists of data source query subjects that were imported from the database. We have a tdim period table, tperiod review table, tuser role table, and then the two fact tables, one for the actual fact data and one for planned fact data. Let's quickly take a look at the data that's returned in the tuser role table. So this has a user ID, which identifies each user, and a fact category SID, which identifies the type of planning period the user is allowed to see. And here we can see the user ID is the two users that we saw earlier, Frank Breton, or Breton F is his user ID, and Jeff Waters, Waters J, is his user ID. Frank Breton is a previewer, so he can see advanced data in the planning periods, whereas a regular user can only see data that has been approved by the previewer. They both have the ability to see actual and planning periods, but Jeff Waters can only see periods that have been approved by a previewer. So for the fact category SID, 1 represents actual and 2 represents planned. If we look at the data coming back from this table, we can see that we have a period SID, so this identifies the quarters. And here we have the fact category SID, which identifies which quarters are determined as actual fact data quarters or planned fact data quarters. And then we have a pass review flag, so has the previewer vetted the data and approved it for viewing by the general population or not. So in this case we can see we have a few periods that have not received the pass preview flag. In this case we have 2014-01 as seen in both these locations, as well as 2014-02. So the first and second quarter are not to be seen by general users, but previewers can see both these periods. 2014-02 is a planning period, as can be seen here. It is identified with a fact category SID of 2, so that's a planning period. And that is why it shows up as an extra period that Frank Breton can see when he runs the report, but there's no actual data for that period. And then the time dimension simply returns time data. So the period SID, which is used to link to the other table, the period name, which we see in the report, the year that it belongs to, the quarter number, and then just another representation for that quarter. If we look at the business layer, this is where filters are implemented. So we have the time dimension, and this time dimension is based off of the tdim period table. What we do in this particular query subject is create filters, and those filters are based off of the tuser role table. So we use a session parameter based on who's logged in at the time. In this case, it's the personalinfo.username session parameter for the account. And based on that user ID, we'll determine what data the person can see. In this case, in Framework Manager, I'm not logged in as any user, so it equates to no user currently, just 2 quotes. The second filter is the fact category SID. So this determines what type of data do you want to look at, planning period data or actual period data. And the last filter has a little more logic to it. It looks to see if it has the past preview flag set to yes and the user role is a user. So this means that if you're a user and it has been set to yes for viewing, you can then view the data, all the periods that have these 2 combinations. Otherwise, allow the previewer to see all the other data. In this case, role is equal to previewer. So there is no flag restriction for a previewer, since he's the one setting the flag. So each time the time dimension is queried, those filters are put in place. They will always be part of any query using the time dimension, and that will reduce the facts that can be seen by the person logged in at that time. And then we simply create connections using the period SID to the planned financial fact table and the actual financial fact table. So if I go into this project right now and I log in as one of those users, we'll start off with Breton F. And I look at the same filter syntax again, we'll now see that the user ID is equal to Breton F. So that's based on this session parameter that is passed in at runtime. If I log out and log in as Jeff Waters, we'll see the same behavior for the Waters J user. As we can see here. So if I run a test against this particular query subject, I'll say which type of period I want to look at, planned or actual. We'll select actual for this particular case, which will make no difference because this user can only see up until Q4 of 2013. And again, if we log in as Breton F, you can see for actual data, we can see all the way up until 2014 Q1. And if we test the sample again and say we want to see the planning periods that this person's allowed to see, that will retrieve an extra period, in this case all the way up until Q2 of 2014. So that's the modeling portion. We simply create a package and pass out the items in the business layer, which include the time dimension and the actual financial fact and planned financial fact query subjects. In the next video, we'll show the report authoring techniques used to create the report that will display the latest period by default for the user logged in.